A common misunderstanding is that protein itself will build muscle. Do you guys find that kind of interesting? Like you could sit on the couch and eat protein and you would become a muscular person. Well, if that were true, we would live in a country full of Arnold Schwarzeneggers because the protein-eating sitting habits of Americans are very well known. And you can look around and see that we are not building strong, muscular bodies sitting and eating protein. You have to do resistance training. Athletic training, and I'll show you, there are many studies out there that actually show this, that you can feed people a diet with 17% protein and 34% protein, and if the exercise schedule is the same, there's no difference in their muscle mass at the end of a period of time, 12, 16 weeks. Why is that? It's because it's the exercise that's doing it. What athletes need is more calories, okay? And what happens, I call it error of attribution. Here's how the protein myth gets perpetuated. So a kid starts playing football in 9th grade, and his calorie needs go up, and he's losing weight, and he doesn't have much energy, and his coach says, you need to eat more protein and drink Gatorade. So he does, and he does better. And he says, protein and Gatorade rock. Okay, if he were eating rice and beans, 500 extra calories a day, and drinking water, 64 ounces a day, he would say, rice and beans rock, and so does water, because what he needed was the calories. He attributed the benefit to the protein. So if athletes get enough calories, they don't need more protein. And athletes who report that they're bigger and stronger, it's because of that error of attribution. So during exercise, you will have some protein and muscle breakdown during intense physical exercise and resistance training when you eat a low carbohydrate diet or an adequate carbohydrate diet. Research shows, however, that the maximum rate of utilization for protein for non-energy use is 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. If more is consumed, in other words, if you consume more protein than you need, then your body has to do one of two things: excrete it, now we're going to blow out your kidneys, or store it as fat. That's right, your body can store extra protein intake as fat. You don't store protein anyplace. You have an amino acid pool. When it's full, you're either going to excrete the protein or you're going to store it as fat. Most people don't know that. So what does this translate to? 15% of calories at the upper end is what athletes need. More calories, more protein, same percentage, 15% of calories from protein. Studies show that athletes don't consume enough calories. I mean, we have research showing this. It's not me just talking about the 9th grade football player. We have research showing that athletes just plain don't consume enough calories. And the other thing I'll mention is if we can get everybody to start eating more carbohydrate instead of protein, it's better for the animals, it's better for everything that way. It's also better for the kidneys. A carbohydrate is much cleaner fuel than protein. And that's important to remember. The Institute of Medicine, in fact, says no additional dietary protein is suggested for healthy adults undertaking resistance or endurance exercise. Now, the timing of protein is important, and I am going to spend just a couple of minutes and a few minutes on the timing of meals. And this surprises a lot of people. You utilize protein and other nutrients best if you eat several times throughout the day. And I'll show you some data on that. When protein intake is adequate, by the way, you don't need to worry about consuming it from animals. A vegetarian or vegan athlete who gets enough calories, enough protein, ends up in great shape. Okay, so here's a good example, and I picked the study for a reason. I'll show you on the next slide of what this protein issue looks like. So in this study, male endurance athletes were placed on 3 diets. And what they did, each athlete ate a diet for 3 weeks. There was a 2-week washout period, then they were put on the next one, 2-week washout, and then on the next one. So they all got to eat all 3 diets. And here's basically what happened. So the protein ranged from 7% to 26%. That's a pretty wide range, wouldn't you say? All right, higher protein intake resulted in the highest rate of muscle breakdown. The more protein they ate, the more muscle they broke down. Lower protein intake resulted in better protein utilization. The researchers further noted there was no advantage to consuming protein higher than 1.8 kilograms per kilogram of body weight. So those people consuming 26% of calories from protein did not have an advantage, they had a disadvantage. The protein intake needed to achieve 0 nitrogen balance, only 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram, even lower. Protein intake of over 1.8 grams carbohydrate intake would be too low to maintain muscle glycogen stores and hydration. Eating a high-protein diet washes out your water stores, and one of the reasons is because water is stored with glycogen. You stop eating carbohydrate, your body uses up ready glucose, burns up the stored glycogen, out comes the water that's been stored, and the athlete's in a perpetually dehydrated state. And the reason I chose this study is it was funded by the National Beef Cattlemen's Association. Now, these people want you to eat meat, and they conducted a study showing that you should not eat meat. I can't overemphasize the importance of this. These are people who have a horse in the race, and they're telling you, don't do it, right? Very important. One other thing I'll mention is protein foods, high-protein foods have the longest gastric emptying time. So they make it's very difficult to eat a high-protein diet and live on that and exercise and compete and that sort of thing. Because has anybody ever eaten too much before exercising, or you didn't wait long enough? It's some of the most uncomfortable feeling you'll ever have. You certainly don't want to be entering a race for money when you're in that state, right? So when you eat carbohydrate food, it goes through the system quickly, gets absorbed, and can be used for fuel. It's a much better source of energy than protein food is. And there's no evidence, by the way, that adding protein to sports drinks improves performance either. I mean, any place you put the protein, in the beef, in the sports drink, it doesn't matter. In the whey protein, it doesn't matter. It does not improve performance. So if you're going to build muscle, which is what a lot of athletes are trying to do and their justification for eating a high-protein diet, here's what you have to do. The first thing is resistance training. The hardest thing I have to get people to do is to exercise. I've never seen anything like the excuses people have for not exercising. Yeah, I mean, and the best one is, I don't have any time. Everybody, okay? Well, I guess I was going to wait till I was 70 years old to become a curmudgeon. We just never got that far. I often say to people, well, the reason why I can exercise all the time is because I have nothing to do. I sit around on the couch eating bonbons most days, and exercise is a welcome intrusion on the sitting. And of course, people say, you're so funny, Dr. Pam. I go, I know, I'm a riot. But you've got to get in the gym. You just have to exercise. And you're never going to be fit. And whether you're interested in exercise for sport or competition or just staying fit, I'll tell you this too. The key to staying independent living for the rest of your life is exercise. The number one reason people enter a nursing home is they're frail. And how you avoid frailty is you start exercising and building a strong body right now. And so you see all these people living to be 100 years old on their own. It's because they can go up and down the stairs and bend over and tie their shoes and reach up in the cupboard and put things away and go get food. You can't do that when you're frail. So I can't help but the advertisement for exercise. Got to do it. You have to have continued calorie and carbohydrate intake, adequate levels of both. Distribution of protein throughout the day. We're going to talk about meal timing in a minute here. And then consumption of carbohydrate after exercise. Because the first thing your body wants to do is replace those glycogen stores, and it can't do it with protein and fat. Have to talk about whey protein, because it's amazing how many athletes use it. So whey protein is one of the two major milk proteins, and the benefit of it is supposed to be it has a very high concentration of branched-chain amino acids, which are good for muscle building. Well, you can see on this slide, soy has just as much branched-chain amino acids. If you're going to load with protein, soy works just as well. I don't think you should load with either of them, but I'm just saying you do not need to consume dairy protein in order to do this. Whey protein powder has 11 to 15% protein. Soy powder, actually more, at 50%. Soy protein concentrate and soy protein isolate are pretty equal to whey. So there's no superiority of whey protein over soy, and no reason to, if you're going to have something with protein in it, it certainly can be soy. All right, let's go on to another topic, and I'll take some questions at the end. I think you probably will have some, but timing of meals is very important. Food intake for athletes is generally not well timed. A lot of times they try to squeeze all the meals, all the calories into 2 meals or 3 meals a day. Both anaerobic and aerobic elite athletes suffer from this performance-wise. And a lot of times athletes will take supplements because they say, I don't have enough time to eat as much food as I need to eat, so I'll just take supplements, and that never works out as well as food. So here's the mechanism of action and how this works. Athletes often operate under a calorie deficit during the day because they skip meals or wait too long to eat. Blood glucose levels drop. Amino acids are recruited, particularly alanine, from the muscle tissue or from dietary protein that's left over and used for fuel. This stabilizes blood sugar, but at the expense of muscle mass and body composition. And by the way, low blood sugar and hyperinsulinemia facilitate the storage of fat. Again, it's counterproductive to what an athlete is trying to do. The more frequent the eating pattern, the more muscle mass can be built and maintained. And because athletes need more calories, it's easier to get them to a calorically adequate state if they're eating more frequently rather than trying to eat an increasing amount of food at a setting. And by the way, we see the same thing with people who have other types of illnesses. Last year when I was here, I did a talk on inflammatory bowel disease. And a lot of times these people aren't eating enough food because they're sick and they don't like eating. And so it's much easier to get their caloric adequacy up by eating 5 or 6 times a day than it is to try to get them to eat more at one sitting. So whether you're an athlete or you're sick, it's easier to take in enough calories if you eat frequently. Failure to eat frequently results in mini starvation periods throughout the day. This lowers the basal metabolic rate. It can average in 620 fewer calories burned per day eventually. And this is what you have to be careful of. We're somewhat victims of our evolutionary history, and humans have learned to live without fuel for long periods of time. That's how we survived as a species. So when you don't eat enough food, you don't have to do that for very long, or if food seems like the food is unpredictable. Your body has this marvelous mechanism which slows down metabolism and allows you to survive with decreasing amounts of food. I've seen people who can gain weight on 700 calories a day. And it's easier for women. Women do it much more efficiently than men, and the reason is the metabolic demands of carrying children and breastfeeding under adverse circumstances make women better at slowing down. Jewish women who entered the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II, who were pregnant at the time they went into the ghetto, they delivered full-term, healthy, normal-weight infants on 450 calories a day. That is the extent to which a human being can slow down metabolism if needed because of calorie inadequacy and or long periods of time, unpredictable timing of meals. So if you lower your metabolic rate, you're going to have increased fat mass, and it makes it more difficult to eat without gaining weight, counterproductive for anybody, particularly an athlete. So let me show you some research on this, because sometimes people just don't believe me. They want to believe in this intermittent fasting idea and some of these other things that are going on a lot, and we have to interfere with the belief system. So, study of 4 groups of elite female athletes: rhythmic gymnasts, artistic gymnasts, middle distance, and long distance runners. Athletes who deviated from energy balance most throughout the day had higher body fat levels both when too many and too few calories were consumed. You can eat too many calories and end up with more fat mass, and eat too few calories and end up with more fat mass because you don't eat periodically throughout the day. So we've always promoted, since I started my business 24 years ago, ELMO, eat less more often. And most people do that anyway. I will tell you that in my office, we get food journals from people. 95% of them involve eating more than just meals. Sometimes people will skip a meal, but they'll eat snacks in the middle of the afternoon, middle of the evening, mid-morning, whatever. So since they're doing it anyway, it's easier to make this transition with that eating pattern. Other people seem very determined not to do that, but they would really be better off. We're trying to take the snackers and turn them into 5 to 6 meals a day of healthy food. We're trying to take the starvers and turn them into 5 or 6 meals of healthy food. Both people solve their problem the same way. A comparison of boxers consuming equal calories in 2 meals versus 6. 2 meals per day resulted in loss of lean mass. 6 meals a day, no loss of lean mass, and there was a decrease in markers for muscle breakdown. Study of 60 male and female college athletes who added 250 calorie snacks 3 times a day, total of 750 extra calories a day. After 2 weeks, they had a significant reduction in body fat, increase in lean mass, improvement in anaerobic power, aerobic endurance, no change in weight. What happened is when they started evening out their calorie intake at the very other eating times was reduced to compensate for the 250 calorie snacks. And so spreading the food throughout the day, same number of calories, increased their performance and increased their body, or improved their body composition. They were told to resume their prior eating pattern, and when they were evaluated 4 weeks later, they'd return to their baseline body composition. It doesn't take very long for the negative effects of fasting as an athlete to set in. It also doesn't take very long for it to reverse as well. The benefits go beyond metabolism and body composition. People who eat more frequently have lower cholesterol, lower LDL cholesterol, lower insulin levels. There are even changes during Ramadan for Muslims who fast during the day. Insulin and leptin levels increase while fasting. Both of those things are associated with more fat storage. Female athletes, one of the biggest concerns, particularly as adolescents, is amenorrhea. And the amount of time spent every day in calorie deficit is a predictor of whether or not a female athlete will develop amenorrhea. All right, so another timing issue, post-exercise carbohydrate intake. So there's an enzyme called glycogen synthase. And because the body is such a perfect machine, once you've done some aggressive exercise and you've depleted your glycogen stores, your glycogen synthase levels go up, and your body's saying, we are ready to store glycogen, so please eat some carbohydrates so we can do that. So the best thing to do is to eat 200 to 400 calories of carbohydrate. Depends on what you've done. It might be 1,000 calories of carbohydrate if you've been running for 5 hours. But anyway, you want to restore those glycogen stores as fast as you can, and the body really can't do it with protein and fat. So you want to eat carbohydrate. All right, let's talk about hydration for a minute, because this is important too, and it's often neglected. So it's very important for athletes to remain hydrated. Tremendous amount of heat and water and sodium lost through sweating when you're an athlete. Most athletes experience dehydration. They start activity dehydrated. Most people start just regular exercise sessions dehydrated. It's astounding to me the number of people who show up at our hot yoga classes for the first time in my office, and they haven't had a glass of water since 1977. And it doesn't go well. It's not pretty, because you just have to have water. The consequences range from fatigue to life-threatening heat stroke, which we'll talk about. So 50% of the average person's weight is water. For males, it's 60%, females a little bit less. Athletes, 70%. And the reason is because they build those bigger muscles with more mitochondria, bigger stores of glycogen, all stored with water. So athletes actually have, a well-hydrated athlete is about 70% water. The blood is 93% water. Very important to remember. Water delivers oxygen and nutrients and hormones and all kinds of substances to cells. And water also, the blood also helps to remove metabolic waste from the cells. So you got to get blood. Blood delivers all these things to the cells, takes the waste out of the cells. Water serves a protective function. It not only plumps up the blood plasma to its full level, but it cushions the spinal cord and the head from injury, and the brain, helps to regulate temperature. And water and electrolytes, like sodium together, they're involved in something called osmotic pressure. It regulates the fluid inside and outside of the cells. The working muscles require more blood flow for delivery of nutrients and removal of waste if you're physically active. It's just like when you exercise more, you need more calories. When you exercise more, you need more blood flow. Everything you need more of if you're going to exercise and do it efficiently. To increase sweat rate, the blood has to be moved from the muscle to the skin. If you have low blood volume, one or both of these systems can fail, and it results in reduced athletic performance. So hydration is required for athletes to perform well. Now, physical activity, you have to dissipate heat, or the body would be too hot, you couldn't stand it anymore. The main method for heat dissipation is sweating. It cools down the body. And by the way, it isn't just sweating, it's the evaporation of sweat. So when I see people toweling off all the time, I tell them stop that, because the actual sweating is not what cools the body. It is the evaporation of sweat from the body. Well, if you're not hydrated, you don't sweat well, right? So you need to be hydrated. Athletes performing intense exercise in hot weather can lose 2.5 liters of water per hour. And along with that water, they lose sodium and electrolytes, and all this stuff has to be replaced. If you don't replace the water and electrolytes from sweating, sweat production is lowered. The body can't cool itself. The core temperature goes up. and people can feel intolerably hot and not even be able to continue. And here's another thing. I mentioned that blood plasma is 93% water. Here's what happens if you don't drink enough water. The blood plasma shrinks. In other words, you can't, you need that fluid to hold it up. The smaller the blood volume becomes, the more sticky and viscous it becomes. All right, so now you've got sticky, viscous blood trying to move through the vessels. And it can lead to increased risk of clotting and heart attacks and strokes. Some very good studies that have been done in Scandinavia have shown that in a dose-dependent manner, the more dehydrated a person is, the higher the risk of heart attack. The more hydrated the person is, the lower the risk of heart attack. And by the way, one of those studies, the researchers reported, the reason why people have heart attacks first thing in the morning is not because they're too stressed to go to work. They have heart attacks in the morning because it is the most dehydrated part of the day. People go to bed dehydrated, they don't drink water all night, and they get up and they're the most dehydrated. That is when the blood is the stickiest and the most viscous and when you're most likely to have a clot and have a heart attack, okay? So hopefully everybody's understanding the importance of A, carbohydrate, B, resistance training and exercise, and C, water. Very, very, very important. Thirst is not a good indicator of your need for water. People say things like, well, if I was dehydrated, I'd drink water. Now, I don't know if you guys have realized, but almost all of you have started drinking water just while I'm talking. I have a magical effect on human behavior. It's just astounding, isn't it? But anyway, thirst is not a good indicator because, first of all, as we age, our thirst mechanism is reduced quite a bit. And often we are very dehydrated by the time we're thirsty, and it becomes even harder to get ourselves hydrated again. And probably the best story I can tell you that illustrates the point. I mean, we have a lot of science to show it too, but I have a very good friend, real successful businessman in Columbus. He was sitting in a boardroom in New York closing a very big deal, and he just fell over on the floor. And they took him to the hospital, called the squad. Guess what his problem was? Dehydrated. Now, here's a guy who's a multimillionaire sitting at a conference table with water pitchers on the table, and I'm pretty sure if this smart guy had been thirsty, he would have reached for some of that water instead of passing out on the floor and ending up in the hospital, but he didn't. So thirst is not a good indicator. So for athletes and other people, you need to get in the habit of drinking water on a regular basis, whether you're thirsty or not. And if you allow yourself to become dehydrated, you only need about a 2% drop in your water levels for your performance to be impacted, not just your athletic performance, but your cognitive performance too. And by the way, many sports require a great deal of cognitive ability in addition to athletic ability. Athletes who start dehydrated can't return to a hydrated state during the competition or the practice. We see this again in the yoga studio. If you come into hot yoga dehydrated and you realize it, you can't start sucking on water. You'll get sick from too much water intake before you'll get hydrated by the end of the class. So we tell people when they come in, just sit down, watch the class if it's too much, and then you can join back in when you're ready, and you'll learn from watching. And we have a very high percentage of people coming for the first time to sit down and watch, and the biggest issue is they're just not hydrated enough to tolerate the heat. So you have to discipline yourself to drink water whether you're thirsty or not on a regular schedule. And heavily sweetened beverages are not a substitute, by the way. You just need water, just plain water. There are two things that can be absorbed directly through the stomach walls, water and alcohol. Don't recommend alcohol for athletic performance, but the water, really helpful, okay? Superhydration. Athletes sometimes do this, endurance athletes will. It's okay to a point. I don't recommend it on a regular basis. It's drinking water until your urine is clear. And the advantage of doing it is that you build more endurance for a marathon or something of that nature. Frequent urination is a problem for athletes in this situation, but eating more sodium, eating foods that contain sodium can help to retain the water through the actual performance. But I don't recommend doing this for regular people. People who tell me their urine is always clear probably means that they're super hydrating every day, and that's really not a good idea. Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, we're talking about water, yeah. I talk all day long, so for me, talking is an Olympic event every day. Yeah, that's my, I also do the gym and hot yoga and all that kind of stuff, but I do talk a lot. Hyponatremia is a condition where, and this is the dangerous thing about drinking too much water on a regular basis, whether you're an athlete or not. Hyponatremia is a very dangerous condition where you wash out your salt stores. And it can be fatal if it's not addressed. And some of the risk factors for hyponatremia, well, some of the symptoms, first of all, nausea, cramping, slurred speech, disorientation, general confusion can lead to coma or death. And some of the avoiding hyponatremia, headache and confusion, nausea, cramping, bloated stomach. This comes from drinking way too much water. And I don't know if you know the story of the Boston Marathon runner who died of hyponatremia. Have anybody heard the story? This woman actually gained like 3 pounds while running the marathon. And that's how much water she drank. And I think she probably thought she was doing a good thing. But if you're putting on weight from water intake while you're either training or competing, you're probably on your way to having hyponatremia. I'm going to see if I could go backwards. No, I think I'm all right. So if you want to prevent hyponatremia, make sure that you're eating enough salt. Athletes who, unless there's some medical condition that warrants salt restriction, athletes should not salt restrict. Actually, most people should not salt restrict because they don't need to, basically. Fluid intake after exercise. Post-exercise hydration is important because it prepares you to be able to go at it again. Most athletes replace about 70% of what they lost in sweat. That's the average. Which means what? If they start tomorrow's training dehydrated. And if they replace it at 70%, it's a downward spiral where people become increasingly dehydrated. We see this, it influences everything. It influences your athletic performance, it influences your cognitive health, it influences your blood viscosity. There's not a single marker of health that isn't damaged by allowing yourself to become dehydrated. So the bottom line, and then we can turn this into some questions, is that athletes perform better when they eat a high carbohydrate, low fat, low protein diet, just the opposite of what they're being told to do. They eat frequently throughout the day, much better eating pattern. They consume enough water and sodium to remain hydrated, and they train hard using clean fuel and water. There's just no way around it. You're not going to eat your way to a strong body without exercise and the right training program. One thing I'll just mention, I first got interested in this topic when I met Brendan Brazier, who's a vegan athlete, one of the first ones who wrote a book on the topic. And his story was compelling because he said he had this big awakening in college. He wanted to be a professional triathlete, and he had a college scholarship and was preparing to do it, and he actually did that. He said he started thinking about the fact that he's from Canada. If you go to college in Canada to be a triathlete, the training program for triathletes doesn't vary much between colleges. So why is it that some athletes do so much better than others? In other words, if everybody's getting some version of the same training program, what's up? And of course, some of it is there's a little bit of genetic gifting in athletic performance. Size can have something to do with it. I couldn't play in the NFL at 119 pounds or whatever I weigh right now. But the other thing is the fuel. He decided then in college that it had to be a difference in fuel. And he started looking into it, tried a bunch of things, he was like an N of one, trying things on himself, and he finally ended up eating a plant-based diet. And he said it was like the aha moment. He gave this talk at our conference in Columbus. I remember it really well. He said it was like the big aha moment because he realized that this is the Holy Grail. This is the Holy Grail that all these people have been looking for, we've been talking about. He says an athlete who eats a plant-based diet can train 1 extra time a day. And the extra training, because of the fast recovery, is the thing that makes you better. It can make the difference between performance and non-performance. There was a football player, and I can't remember his name, right? It might be Tony Gonzalez, who converted to a plant-based diet when he was the oldest player in the football league in the NFL. And he wrote articles about this, that people half his age were laying around for 2 days after the football game. And he was in the weight room the next day because the recovery was so fast on a plant-based diet. So it's unfortunate, but athletes are told to do the opposite of everything that we've been talking about here. And they don't get to see, well, it's back to informed decision making. Athletes should be making decisions about their diet the same way that we've been talking about making decisions about everything. Look at evidence and then choose what's best. And instead, they're just letting coaches and sports experts tell them what to do.